Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul. Hope you're having an amazing day. Do you have your heart set on upgrading to an RTX 5090? Well, there could be some bad news in the form of the power consumption, because there are some reports that are floating around online that the power supply requirements, as well as the TDP, I guess you should say, for RTX 5090 and other GPUs in the Blackwell series are going to be considerably higher perhaps than many had predicted. And a lot of this seems to stem from the design problems that Nvidia were facing from the Blackwell data center cards. In this video, I also want to give you guys some updates into the benchmarks of the Intel Arrow Lake 285K processors, because they are essentially kicking the butt of everything. And we're going to get into that right after this quick message from the sponsor of the video.
If you're running a copy of Windows 10 which isn't activated, of course, not only do you have to worry about the missing customization options, but there's also that annoying Windows desktop watermark reminding you to activate. Today's video is sponsored by WhoKeys.com, and they have an excellent price on Windows 10 Professional as well as Home keys. Yeah, and they also of course sell games. I've bought a few Windows 10 keys with my own personal account to test everything was legit and worked in preparation for this sponsored video. You can pick up one of their keys for 25% off using the coupon code RGT in the checkout. There's links to their website in the video description. Also, if you're building a few systems, there's bundles available too. Again, you can check out WhoKeys.com and use the coupon code RGT for 25% off the listed Windows 10 key prices.
We'll start out with Intel's Arrow Lake because it's going to be the quicker of the two topics to get through, but of course you can find a timestamp down below if you want to skip straight to Blackwell. So we are at the point, of course, where we're still officially waiting for Intel to disclose Arrow Lake to the world. It's going to be very interesting to see what Intel's strategy is in terms of pricing and marketing. Obviously, we know what the Ryzen 9000 series of processors is bringing to the table. Currently, they are doing okay in the market, but there are some unofficial price cuts, especially for the I think it was the 9950X, and ultimately these processors are performing okay, but it really is quite evident that they are struggling from a lack of memory bandwidth, and of course at the end of the day AMD really has seemed to have designed these CPUs for the data center. With that said, I will be curious to see what the X3D variants bring to the fray. But as for Intel, there have been some very interesting leaks which really do show Arrow Lake could be quite performant. Unfortunately, the benchmarks we're about to go through are not gaming, so let's just wait and see. But now, unfortunately, these benchmarks are Geekbench, so we still don't have exactly comprehensive gaming performance, but we're looking at 3420 for the single core score and Geekbench 6.3. and 23,376 for the multi-core score. To put that into some level of context, a 14900K in single core is looking around 3,100 points. Meanwhile, the 9950X is going to be scoring 3,360. WCCF Tech have managed to do a really nice job of compiling all of this data. And again, the benchmarks were originally obtained by Bench Leaks. Well, I guess you could say they found them in the Geekbench database. Meanwhile, for multi-thread, the 9950X is scoring 20,550, and the 13900K is scoring around 20,200. The 14900K is scoring just under 21,000. Of course, when it comes to any of these benchmarks, it's going to very much depend on what power settings you've got for your CPU, what's running in the background, the configuration of your memory, and so on and so on. But I think we are getting a pretty good picture now, because there were some leaked benchmarks a couple of weeks back as well. Very similar configuration. It was the 285K once again, and the results were quite similar. The only difference is the multi-score was a little bit lower, but the single core, I believe, was a little bit higher. So we are starting to settle into a kind of a good understanding of where these CPUs are going to settle. It seems that the P cores in Arrow Lake do not feature hyperthreading, but it's going to be very interesting to see how Intel actually markets these CPUs, and I will be very interested to see whether AMD actually implements any price cuts for the Ryzen 9000 series if Intel does manage to compete fairly well. With that said, let's move on to Nvidia's Blackwell graphics cards, as there are some reports that Blackwell, of course, for the data center is having some issues, and basically Nvidia needed to change their plans for it. I've covered this in a previous video, so I won't go over it too extensively because I'll eat up quite a lot of video space covering it, but you can Google it yourself if you want a little bit more information, because ultimately much of this doesn't exactly pertain to the gaming cards as well, and we're not fully certain, although there are some indicators that this is the reason, but it's not fully confirmed whether this is the reason that the gaming variant might have a higher power consumption figure than initially reported. So there is a very interesting report from my drivers, because they are stating that Nvidia did of course have those problems with the data center cards, and again Nvidia themselves did confirm that this is the case. But while the data center as well as GeForce chips will be quite different from one another, because they do share some of the fundamental architecture, there is a potential that RTX 50 may have been impacted somewhat as well. Furthermore, Nvidia do seem quite keen to prioritize the Blackwell data center GPUs. I mean, you can look at Nvidia's revenue in terms of how much it makes from HPC/data center versus gaming. So you can imagine that their priority right now is that. So to that end, we now have a report over from Coppertite7 Kimmy on Twitter. So Coppertite7 Kimmy is stating that they are indeed hearing that the power consumption figures could be higher with Blackwell and potentially quite decently slow than some of the earlier rumors. Meanwhile, if you go back not too long ago, Seasonic actually had a leak of sorts for their PSUs, and they were basically listing various RTX 50 series graphics cards, with the 5090 coming in at 500 watts. Oh, hi there, it's Paul from the future. This is actually recorded after the video had been initially recorded and it was about to be edited. Basically, there's been an update, and according to Coppertite7, it seems that the power consumption figures that they've been hearing is indeed 600 watts. So again, my figures from mid-July were 460, 490 and 550 watts, and this is 600. So that is absolutely crazy if that turns out to be true. I would caveat this again with the fact that we have heard some really high figures from RTX 40, I think even RTX 30 in the past, and then of course Nvidia managed to wrangle those figures to much lower levels. But if it is 600 watts, holy goodness. Now remember that RTX 4090 is 450 watts for its TDP. That is with an asterisk, however. The caveat here, of course, is that you can get certain models of the RTX 4090, for example, which can go higher, and if you're overclocking, so at the end of the day, Nvidia can change these figures at any point. Indeed, back in July, I think it was like midpoint, like 15th, 16th, something like that, I released a video where I was discussing some of the figures that I'd been hearing. A very good source of mine told me that they'd heard that there were 3 different configurations of the 5090. It was a 460, 490, and finally a 550 watt BIOS that was being tested. I'm not 100% certain on the SM configuration. Now, it is using GB202, so the maximum amount of SM can of course be 192, but I was hearing it was around 160-ish. And that was with a 448-bit bus and 28 gigabytes of memory, GDDR7 of course. It is worth noting that these configurations are not final right now, so anything can change. Nvidia can up the number of SMs, they can reduce the number of SMs, they can up the power configuration, they can basically do whatever they want, because at the end of the day these cards are not announced, and hell, even a product that has been announced, it's been cancelled before. So there is that to take into consideration. I don't think we're going to hit a 700 watt power. Let's just put it this way. I don't think we're going to see the 5090 hit like 700 watts or anything like that. But 500 watts, 550, potentially yes. I wouldn't be too surprised. I have heard that the GPUs are definitely boosting over 3 GHz, and as for the rasterization performance and ray tracing performance, I'm hearing that they're much closer. So in other words, there's less of a gap when you enable ray tracing with RTX 50. There's also some other weird things I've heard for RTX 50 that, quite frankly, I'm not super confident in. Like DLSS 4 allegedly is going to be coming in with RTX 50, along with a bunch of stuff using neural networks, and Nvidia, to their, to give what I heard a little bit of credibility, there have been some things like neural networks for material shading and textures and all of this stuff, and I'll probably put out a video about that in the not too distant future where I kind of go into this more, because this is literally topics that Nvidia have been discussing and have publicly, disclosed a lot of details on. But whether that's going to be part of DLSS 4, frankly, I don't know. I would love it to be. I'm sure it's going to eventually be part of something. Like Nvidia are not just doing this research because it's fun, although I'm sure that they are enjoying it, but I'm sure that eventually they want to actually make it into a product. But at this point, it doesn't look necessarily like it's ready to go into something like DLSS 4, but, I'd love to be pleasantly surprised. I've also, again, as I put out a video a while back, I'm still hearing that there are Titan products in the works, but they don't seem to be releasing anytime soon. It seems like it's summer at the earliest, and I've heard a 48GB and a 64GB model could be in the works. However, that again was with an asterisk, that the specifications can change. Obviously, there will also be additional SMs as well enabled for the Titan products. I still think that there's a very good chance that RTX 50 is not going to launch this year. I think it's probably going to be next year. The rumours that have been floating around over the past day or so seem to also indicate that Nvidia will be actually delaying the products. And I think we kind of got an idea that this might be the case anyway with the gaming situation. Nvidia kind of just tends to do what they want. RTX 40 is selling quite well, especially cards, well, actually just across the board, but the 4060, I think it's the 4060 Ti, someone correct me in the comments below, that seems to have been actually picking up a lot of momentum right now. So Nvidia are in this kind of situation where they don't really need to launch a new product. Obviously, they will, and they are to a degree very much a creature of habit. But remember, RDNA 4, even if RDNA 4 is 10 or 20% better in rasterization performance than the leaks, which again is around a 7900 XTX, it's still going to be only about as fast as a 1490 at best. The RT performance of RDNA 4 is allegedly a little better than, well, actually quite a bit better than RDNA 3, but again, there's no massive push. The real massive push is if AMD can really crank them out at large quantities and there is a really good pricing, then I can see Nvidia being a lot more incentivized to push out RTX 50. But right now, until RDNA 4 does launch, which again, the rumor is that that's going to be next year, I just don't see them really having any sense of urgency. So yeah, I will be very curious, but I'm also interested to hear your thoughts and opinions on this. Do you care about the TDP of a card? I mean, obviously, if it's the same performance, you're not going to be like, well, I'd rather go with 800 watts rather than 200 watts. Obviously, that's being I'm slightly exaggerating, but how much does TDP actually bother you? Obviously, there are concerns like heat output, especially if you're living in the UK and you don't have air conditioning in all homes. That can be a bit of a pain in the ass. But apart from that, and yeah, how much does it actually bother you? If the GPU is 400 versus 450 watts versus 500 watts, how much of a difference does that make to you personally? With that said, guys, I will ask a few sources on this because at the moment I've not had any responses from the people I've asked because this is quite new information. So, it could take a couple of days for me to hear anything if I do, but if I do, I will of course let you guys know. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.